Yes, I ought to say I was very fortunate at Sedbergh School. We had as our history teacher in our last 2 years a man called Andrew Morgan. He had been at Oxford before the war. I have a video interview of him which I'll put up on the web sometime. And he was a very, very clever man, very erudite and thoughtful Welshman. His nephew is now the chaplain at King's College. And Andrew inspired me. I remember at his 70th birthday he had a party in the House of Commons because he taught my uncle, Sir Robert Rhodes James, the historian, and he arranged a party. Andrew was asked to invite 12 people who he had taught, and they included the person who set up one of the greatest archaeological museums in Britain, the Viking Museum in York, the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Bingham, yes, artists, members of Parliament, the chairman of the BBC, Sir Christopher Bland, who's now chairman of British Telecom, who Xiao Xiao has met. These people were all in his pupils, and I was one of them. And I remember the Lord Bingham standing up, his hands shaking. He was a great law lord and had given many speeches in the House of Lords, but in front of his old schoolmaster he was quite nervous. But he said that his whole world had changed through Andrew, because when he went and learned history with him, suddenly he went through a magic door into a past worlds which were made alive for him by Andrew. And Andrew did the same to a large extent for me. He made me really love history. I remember my first essay which was what happened or what were the causes of the Renaissance. I've still got the essay. And I wrote as well as I could for him, and I got this essay back with comments in red ink saying alpha beta, which means very high mark. You have the makings of an Oxford historian, or you are going to do something. And so anyway, Andrew inspired me, and he had been taught by people who had been taught by Maitland's generation. So he had been taught of the continuity of English history. And so when he read my Origins of English Individualism some years later and wrote to me about it, which I quote in the beginnings of The Culture of Capitalism, he said, I was amazed by what you had to say, because what you say is so obvious to me. I mean, this is what I believe, and I've always believed. I didn't know all this nonsense that the Marxists were going around. I never realized that people were now believing that there had been a revolution from a peasant feudal society to a modern capitalist society, because I was taught by John Prestwich this other stuff. So I just thought you were inventing this, but now I read a few books, I see that people actually believe this nonsense.